Hi and welcome into my studio, and the image you can see on screen now is a pastel that I recently did of a wolf, and it was a major piece for me to tackle. And before I jumped right into it, I wanted to try some things out. I wanted to try out some colours, some pan pastels, and I wanted to see how they was all going to work together and build confidence in myself, so I thought that I could, really do a good wolf. Now the main wolf is on my Patreon channel. If you don't know about that, I do videos on there every month. They're really in depth and it's about 4 hours long. I miss virtually nothing out. There's lots and lots of real-time footage on there and voiceovers where I'm giving tips and techniques. But the video you're going to see now is going to be a short series of videos. It's of that test piece that I did, so it's just a small section of the wolf's head, but at least you're going to see how I tackle all different furs, the glassy eye, the nose, and that type of thing. Here you can see I've got my pastelmat paper set out. I've got my drawing transferred onto it with graphite paper. I've got those circular pastels, so they're called pan pastels, compressed, very high quality pastels in a cake pot, and you use soft pastel tools like a sponge, which I'm using. They're specific tools. They come in all different shapes and sizes, so I'm trying different ones out on this wolf as well. And that's what I'm going to be using on this first section. And what I'm doing is the underlayer, the blocking in stage that I would be doing in oils. And if you're new to pastels, pastels are very, very similar in technique to oils. They cross over really well. It's easy to jump, I find, from oils to pastels and vice versa, because you work in such a similar way. You work from dark to light. Now if you work in coloured pencils, the main issue you've got with coloured pencils is you can't really put a light over a dark easily. And that's what I found that really frustrated me with that coloured pencil, and why I find pastels so much easier. Okay, so what I'm doing now is, as I said, blocking in. So I'm creating an underdrawing, a map as such, where I'm putting in the lights and the darks, but I'm not going too dark. I'm not going very dark, and I'm not going to go very light either. So I'm putting in kind of like middle tone, because on top of this underdrawing, that's when I'm going to come in with the pencils that you can see on the left, Carbothello pencils, and the pastel sticks, Conti sticks, you can see on the right hand side. And as I say, I go into much more detail than this on my Patreon channel, because then I've got the luxury of being able to spend 4 hours in videos showing you and telling you everything and every step that I'm doing along the way. On the shorter videos and on YouTube, I've got to compress that down quite a lot. So if you want the real long videos with lots of instructions, that's www.patreon.com/wildlife art, and I've got roughly about 550 supporters, members on there now. Okay, so I've got the luxury of having a full set of pan pastels, so I can look at my subject, I've looked at my reference photo, and then I've tried to match up those base colours that I'm applying now with the colours I've got in my set. And there's some wonderful colours in there, lots of natural earth colours too, as well as vibrant ones. If you haven't got pan pastels, you could use soft pastels, perhaps Rembrandt pastels. There's lots of different makes out there. But if you're going to use very soft pastels, and things like Unison can be very soft, be careful you're not filling the tooth of the paper up, because if you fill it up too early on, then your pencils won't go over the top of them. So you'll see in probably part 2 of this video how I blend this underdrawing into the paper, how I really push it into it, and that's quite critical, because it then allows me to put the pencils on top. By pushing the pastel in, I'm still retaining a lot of the tooth of the paper. Now pastelmat is a sanded paper, so it's got a very lightly sandpaper texture, very lightly, more of a satin velvety feel to it really. But if you use a different paper, something like an ingress type paper, or those pastel papers that got that uniform pattern on there, that's the type of paper I used years ago. It's not going to work. You're not going to get the right layers on there, and you're not going to get the details. I've got other YouTube videos that shows me testing out these papers, so I urge you to have a look at those because it's going to show you why I use things like pastel mat, pastel card and UArt papers. So I'm just going to continue now with this blocking in process. I'm not sure if you can see in that bottom right hand corner below that reddish pan pastel, I'm resting it on a piece of paper. Now that's just a normal piece of card or paper, and I'm using that kind of as my mixing palette. So you'll see I'll grab a colour, dab it on the paper, perhaps another colour to perhaps blue it down a bit or redden it slightly, and I'm just rubbing it on that paper, mixing them together just as you would using a palette with paints. Because with the pan pastels they mix much more readily than normal pastels. So I wouldn't say you'd use it to kind of have a blue and a yellow to make a green. But if you've got a colour in there that's quite close to what you want, then say for instance I wanted a reddish brown, but mine's not quite reddish, then you can take your brown and put a little bit of something like a burnt sienna in there to warm it up. So you can use that small mixing area, and you can also mix in the pan if you want, so put one colour into another just to adjust those colours. Now I found normal pastel 6 don't really mix well like that, and that's why you see lots of pastel artists, they have lots and lots of different colours, because with pastels we're not mixing like we do with paints, we're more selecting the colours from our say selection of pencils you can see on the left, and looking for the closest match that way. So you can see I've lightened a few areas up again, darkening this bottom section, and you can see that I'm using that soft tool in the fur growth and the way that it's lying, and that's quite important, and I say about that in every one of my wildlife videos and on my Patreon channel as well, because that's what gives the body of the animal shape and form. So darkening the section up the top, blocking in. Now with pastels we generally, you see a lot of pastel artists, they work on one small area at a time. They're starting the top left hand corner and pretty much complete it before moving down slightly, and if you're right handed you see they will generally work from top left to bottom right, just so they're not resting on the paper. Now you can get away around that in a few ways. You can either have a piece of paper to rest your hand on, as you'll see later in the demo, or you can work upright. I'm working flat just for film purposes. So there's a few ways to work around it, but I found that with pan pastels what I'm doing is creating the work more like I would with oils. So I'm getting a base down rather than working on one small section at a time. I'm working on pretty much the whole base and then bringing everything up to completion to the same level, which makes much more sense to me. So I'm not going very detailed on this underdrawing because, as I said, it's the map, it's the basic tones that's on there. It's going to allow me to concentrate on top now, getting the pencil work going well on there and actually creating the fur texture, so I can concentrate on that more than the tones, because I will have this map underneath that's going to really simplify things for me. So here you can see that underdrawing is in there, and I've got my paper stump that I'm using to rub into the surface, or rub the surface of that pan pastel into the pastel mat paper, blending it out. Now the stump I'm using is by Derwent, and it's a very soft one. It's actually made of rice paper, and lots of times these stumps are very hard, and to know if you've got the right feel to it, perhaps you've got to use a different make, perhaps you can't get the Derwent ones even though they're super cheap. It should be quite pliable when you're pushing it. It should feel quite soft, like pushing on your finger. It should be giving it. If it's a very hard stump, then it's not going to blend out at all. It's going to just actually, you know, the marks are going to stay there on the paper. Now, if I use my finger with this, once again, it wouldn't blend out well at all. That pastel matte paper really holds the pastel in place, especially on these first layer or two. So that's why I like to use these soft stumps. Now, if you wanted to keep an area from moving too much, that's when the harder stumps would be used, so perhaps on an eye or something like that. But what I'm trying to create here is kind of a blurred background, and then that'll allow me to come on top with my pastel pencils, which are on the left hand side, and then I can layer on top quite easily. And this pastel matte paper will take lots and lots of layers, much more than other things like Ingress. But if you can't get pastel matte paper, I've tried UArt 600 or 800 grade, that works excellent, and pastel card works excellent as well, although it's a bit more expensive. And check out my video on YouTube where I test the papers side by side so you can see why I actually pick certain papers and if there's any downside of any of them. So you can see I'm pushing into that surface, and I can also use these stumps to grab a little bit of the Panpastel to adjust some colours slightly, but I'm not too concerned. What I'm after here is kind of like a tonal underpainting, so just the underneath, the areas that you would see in between the highlights and the darks on the reference photograph. And I want to be going darker rather than lighter. So if I'm going to go anything, it needs to be darker, because I want to go from here then and put in the darks with either the Conti sticks on the right hand side or the pencils on the left hand side. So that'll be the darks in between these mid-tones, and then after that I'll finally come in with the lighter values with the pencils. Notice as well when I'm blending, I'm generally blending in the fur growth and the direction in which it's actually sitting on the surface. I'm squinting at the reference photo, which is in front of me propped upright, so I'm drawing actually flat on a table, and that eradicates too many details from the reference, because all I'm really looking for are those tones, those lights and darks, and the major color changes. So I'm just going to continue this process now and blend over the whole surface. Here you can see how I'm using that stump on his side so that I'm covering more of a larger area. And to clean the stumps, you can just rub them on something like clean kitchen tissue or a rag, or you can rub them on sandpaper if you want to actually take the surface off and get it really clean. But they're so cheap, what I usually do is just keep one for the lighter colours, a couple brand new for whites, and then one or two for the darker colours as well. Going back in now with the Panpastels, just refining a few areas, darkening some areas, lightening a couple of other areas up. You can see how they easily go on top of the underlayer. Important not to put too much down at this stage. So now you can see that whole surface has been blended down, and I'm coming back in with the pastels again, just adjusting the colours here and there, using that piece of paper on the bottom right hand corner just as a mixing palette. It's just smooth paper, nothing special about it at all. And now I'm adjusting these colours, and then I can start to come in then on the next video with the pencils and start to create more realism and add some details. Okay, so now that underdrawing is done, I'm going to start to actually detail the eye itself with pastel pencils, pastel sticks, and I'm not going to spend time showing this on the video because on my YouTube channel I've got quite a few detailed videos now showing large pastel eyes, so we would just be going over that again. So I'll just skip through that, and then we can really look at how I start to create this fur texture. So when I create fur texture, the method that I follow on most of my drawings is to get the underdrawing done first. Now you've seen that on the first two videos where I use those Panpastels and sticks to actually get that underlayer done. So that's my mid-tone over the old canvas. Now after I've done that, I like to come in with the darks, and that usually means that I come in using Conti sticks. But you can also do this with pencil. I use the Conti sticks basically because they're very easy to handle, they're cheap to buy, and they save my pencils. If I'm using pencils all the time, doing all of it with pencils, I'm going to wear them down and I'll be buying them all the time, as I said. So I like to use these Conti sticks. Now because I've got the undercolours already in there, I can just get away pretty much with only using the black, because what I'm doing now on this particular wolf is just putting in the dark shadowy areas in between the highlight areas. So we've got our mid-tone already down. Now I'm putting in the darks, and then to put in the details I'll use a couple of sticks, but for the real details I'll start to come in with sharp pencils and overlay those on top. So as you can see, I've sharpened my stick. Now you can do that simply with a bit of sandpaper on a hard surface, on a flat surface, and you just draw the stick over it a few times and that'll create a sharp edge. Now some people do a sharp edge on both sides to create a point to it. Now what I don't like about that is because the point is then in the central part of the stick, I can't see where it's actually drawing. So I like to sharpen just one edge, and that gives me a chiseled edge. Alternatively, you could sharpen all four edges and that'll give you more of a pencil look to it. But I quite like, you know, doing this chiseled edge, and these sticks are firm so it lasts a long time as well. Now the important thing to do is to keep these marks going in the fur direction. So just as you've probably seen on my oil painting videos, exactly the same technique here. Got to go in the fur direction. That's what's giving the shape and the form to the animal. So if you're going in the wrong direction, it's just not going to look believable at all. So got to go in that fur direction. Now that brown piece of paper, in case you're wondering, there's nothing special about it. I'm using that because I'm doing this flat on a table with a camera above me for ease of use, and also to get the best video for you guys possible. If I was doing it vertically on a canvas, I wouldn't need that piece of paper. I could be using a marl stick or something to rest my hand on instead. So I'm just going to speed this section up now so you can see how this underlayer develops. So you can see I'm doing lots and lots of little very small marks. Going extra dark then on the parts that are going to be quite dark, like that part up there on the top section. This section is going to be quite light, so I only need a few of those little marks on there. So I don't want to go too dark there. And you can see that colour, the undercolour, really showing through. Given that effect that I put lots of different colours down on the underlayer of these small marks. And you don't have to sharpen these sticks very often either doing this. What I normally do is sharpen both ends so I can easily flip it around if I need a sharper mark. So you can see how it goes. Very small marks now on this nose area, the bridge of the nose. Almost just like little dots. Just add in a few lighter tones. So now I've done that underlayer using the black, I can start to come in then and start to use some lighter tones. So I can still stay in with the sticks if I want to, or go to the pencils and start to gently overlay the colours on top. So I'm creating layers. Very similar once again to oil painting. If you've seen any of my pastel videos, you know I say quite a lot how similar the techniques are. It's almost identical. If you're used to oil painting or even acrylic painting, going over to pastels is very easy. In fact, you'll probably actually be a bit shocked at how easy it is to go over to it. With coloured pencils, then it starts to get a bit more tricky. If you've tried coloured pencils, it can be a bit frustrated. I know I was frustrated with them because basically I just haven't got the patience to do all that negative work, because you can't put a light easily over a dark layer. So you can't work, which is the, you know, the normal way you would think the lighter fur texture actually lays on top of the dark. That's just how it works with highlights coming from the sun. They're sitting on top. So to then do it with a coloured pencil, you've got to leave out the highlight area, so you're actually working backwards, and that's why I love pastels. It's just how the animal or the fur is on the animal. You start with the darker underlayers and then you layer the lighter layers on top, and that's what I'm doing here with these Conti sticks. So quite a light touch. I haven't even sharpened this one. I'm just using the actual pointy ends that's already on it, just using the corners, going in that fur direction and just overlaying. As simple as that, just overlaying. And you can see how quickly a drawing can develop when you're using these techniques. I've not gone too light yet, and once again I'll speed this section up so you can see how this layer develops as well. So you can see the edge I've sharpened on that pastel stick. It's on the holder on the right now, so you can clearly see how I sharpen them to about 45 degrees, I assume. Lots and lots of different colours in this very brightly lit section. So I'm using pinks, oranges, yellows, but no pure whites. I'm saving that till last. Don't want to go too white just yet. So I'm getting all these colours in before I blend them, because these are not the details yet. Sometimes if you haven't got the colour you want and you need to subdue it, you can put a grey on top, so don't forget you can layer with your pastels quite easily. Blending that with my finger because I don't want to go too soft a blend, and then in areas that I do, I can come back in with that soft Derwent stump, just like I did with the initial blocking in. And that's glazing with a pencil. See, I'm using on its side, just lightly going over the top, so you can still see all the colours underneath. I'm not creating lines with that, subduing it with the grey and the darkening it then with the Carbothello black pencil. So that's a nice easy way to, you know, darken areas and slightly adjust colours as well by this glazing technique. Because in the Conti stick, although I've got the full set there, there's always going to be colours that you're missing, and same with your pencils and any of your pastels. There's always going to be something you're looking for that you haven't got. So don't forget you can layer other colours on top. Now I'm coming back in with the sticks with this fur texture. Okay, so back down to normal speed. As I said, it develops really quickly with these techniques, and this was only a test piece, but I wanted to try different things out. I wanted to try out how I could blend and make the fur look soft, how I could create harder edges, how much I would need to create a dark underlayer, how dark I needed to go while still being able to overlay enough layers on this pastel matte paper to create the areas that's going to be very, very vibrant and very light in colour. Lots of the other papers, you can only put 1 or 2 layers and then it just won't accept any more layers. That's why I've done quite a few tests on different papers. I've bought lots and lots of them, and I've got a pastel paper test review then on my YouTube channel, so that you guys don't have to go out and spend lots of money and end up with a drawer full of pastel papers that you don't like just to find out the one that works. And if you're doing wildlife and you need to get lots of layers, pastel matte is by far, so far, the most all-round usable paper that I've found. Things like pastel card is also very good, but if you get any moisture or water near it, it just falls to pieces and the surface comes off. So pastel matte is much more robust, and UArt papers are also very, very good as well. 600 or 800 grade is nice and smooth, just like pastel matte, but still able to take lots of pastel layers. You can see here how I'm still building layers. going lighter and lighter most of the time, but the beauty with pastel again is that you can go dark over the top of the lights too. So gently go in brighter. I don't want to put my brightest light on too quickly, and I don't want to go pushing these pastels too hard and filling up the tooth of that paper. Now, as I said, you could have done all this stage using pastel pencils instead of the sticks. So I'm continuing with that, blocking in with the Conti sticks. Not doing too much detail yet, so it's generally getting in that mid-tone. Then I'm blending it in lightly with my finger, because it's pastel mat, it doesn't go blend in too much. And now you can see I'm using the sticks again to get in those darks. So that's the dark areas that's actually in between the fur, so that's the shadowy recesses. Using the Conti sticks again there, just because at this stage it's quite a large drawing, so I don't need to go to the very sharp pencils and fine details yet. And the Conti sticks have got a nice range in there of these muted, subdued tones, so it really suits the wolf. Now I'm using the sticks yet again to do the blocking in of the snout area and that dark area of the mouth as well, the lower jaw, and then the blue highlight on top. And when you've got a shiny area or a wet area like this, generally look at the reference. It'll probably end up blue or purple colour because it's reflecting the sky above in many instances. So don't always go and reach for the white. Usually the blue is the one that's required, or even a grey. So just continuing that blocking in, getting that shape nice and correct on there, and the darks nice and dark as well. Now I'm switching over to those pencils. Now I'm using Conti pencils here. I could have used the Derwent as well, they're very, very similar. And you can see I'm really going in that fur direction now, creating that upper layer of fur, so that's helping to give me that depth as well to the fur. And this is the important part of getting that thick feeling. So I'm going lighter and lighter generally as well, taking my time, using that piece of paper to rest my hand on when I don't want the smudging area underneath. There's nothing special about that paper, anything would work on there. It's just preventing my hand rubbing on the surface, and because it's only half of the head, I don't need it all the time because I can actually just rest on the side. So when I want a more defined mark, I'm pushing that little bit harder with the pastels. You can see how easily they are overlaying. This is something you can't do with coloured pencils because the pastels are opaque, the coloured pencils are not. So this is why I love the ease of pastels, and why it's really taken off for me as a secondary medium, especially because it's so very, very similar to oil and acrylic painting, where you can put a lighter layer easily over the top. So if you're used to that type of thing, to painting in oils or acrylics, you really shouldn't find any problem at all going over to pastels, because they are that similar. Whereas I liken coloured pencils more to watercolour because they're really kind of a transparent medium, so you've got to reserve the whites. Makes it much, much more difficult. Now I'm starting to add some of those refinement details, darkening the darks, tidying areas up. I'm putting in highlights as well, because as you work with pastels, sometimes areas get a little bit smudged or a little bit muddy, and that's where you've got to do that very quick touching up and refining. So add into those darks, making those really punchy. The pastel sticks in general go a little bit darker than the pastel pencils. And I want to darken a few areas here as well, so I'm going back in with the sticks because I want them really punchy. And then back with the pencils now, putting in much more of the highlights, getting that texture really in there. But remember, this is just a test piece. It's just trying out various techniques before I do the big wolf drawing. Before I spend probably about 4 or 5 hours or more on that wolf. And this one is only a short, quick piece, perhaps about 1.5 to 2 hours long. So I'm not investing a lot of time in there, and that's going to take the pressure off me on doing things like practice pieces. If it doesn't work, it doesn't really matter. I'm just enjoying it for the sake of enjoying it and doing it. Now I'm coming in with much lighter tones, but you notice with my pencils it's still not white, it's still more of the muted light greys and light browns. But now you can really see that thickness of the fur developing. There's a much slower version of this on my well, of the actual large wolf I'm doing on my Patreon channel, where you'll see many more tips and it much slowed down. I think it may even be about 3 or 4 hours long, so you really get the effect of exactly how I do it, the pressure I'm putting down, how I'm overlaying the pastels as well. Now to the fine details, I'm just putting in some of these whiskers. It's not difficult at all with pastel pencils, just got a sharp pencil, and as you see on some of my videos on my YouTube channel, I've tried out various sharpeners so you can see which ones work with the pastels. And as I bring this video to an end, hope you've enjoyed it, hope you've picked up just a few tips on this short video, and as I mentioned, lots and lots of full-length videos over on my Patreon channel. So I think that's about it. Don't need to do any more as a test piece, and it makes quite a nice piece. It could be framed up and look quite good and unusual, just half a face on its own anyway. So hope you've enjoyed it. If you're looking for more art resources, I've really got you covered. I've got a dedicated tutorial website, that's jasonmorgan.co.uk, lots of videos on there, ebook tutorials, you name it, it's on that site. I've got a Patreon art channel, so every month I put up brand new videos, and that could be pastel videos, oils, charcoals, they're full-length videos, and there's also photo references with the Easy Trace line art on there. I've got quite a few hundred people supporting me, and that's on Patreon. And also, if you're after even more reference photos, I got a dedicated website just packed with reference photos. I think there's about 900 on there at the moment. So that's wildlifeart-online.com. Now please, with my YouTube channel, new videos coming on here as well. If you can possibly subscribe to the channel, then you're never going to miss out on new videos.